Okay, let me yeah, I hope this is working. All right, so I thought I'd interrupt the videos, the philosophy series. Well, not interrupt it, but yeah. So anyways, I thought I'd just make a video of the philosophy books that I currently have. I don't want to say in my possession, I have more. And I have more in storage, I believe. But these are the ones that I have out that I'm currently okay, I'm not currently reading, but that I have out so that I can access because I think I will, like, at some time or another, want to reference these books, or they're just, they're articles in there that I want to read, obviously, which is the same thing. Okay, so let me get into it. I have a stack of books over here. There's other stacks to the side, and there's some over here you can't see. All right, so this is just like a bookshelf tour. Don't expect too much commentary on these books. Some of these I haven't read. Some of these I just read the intro. Some of these I like cherry picked a couple of articles, or just like looked up certain ideas. All right, here we go. They are in somewhat of an order, so you'll see that. So the first book here is Philosophy Made Simple, by Stroll, I believe. No, this is Popkin. Yeah, by Richard Popkin and Abram Stroll. Um, both are big names in philosophy, and this is a remarkably apropos title. Uh, they really explain things uh, in a way that, like, even though like some of the topics that they talk about here, which are just typical analytic philosophy topics, um, they talk about it in ways that I had not thought of before. So I learned things. I learned some things just from reading, like the stuff they say about Aristotle. And it's not like I haven't had any education in Aristotle. It's just like I didn't get out of my studies what they had to teach me. So okay. So by the way, so if you're new to analytic philosophy, this is a good book to start with. Once again, Philosophy Made Simple by Popkin and Stroll. And you'll see their collaboration later. And you'll see Stroll later. I have other books of his. Okay. Next few books are on epistemology. Skeptical Philosophy for Everyone. This is by Richard Popkin and Abram Stroll. There you go. I didn't even realize. I didn't realize this book was next. Okay. So good authors. I highly recommend that if you find somebody or somebody's, does it make sense? Anyway, if you find someone who writes well, who writes clearly, read that person. Forget whether they are like the highest, like in your opinion, the top philosophers, or even the top philosophers in their field. Forget that. It's more important that you read somebody that writes clearly, because that will help you make the greatest progress, right? So yeah, and by the way, so I recommend Stroll and Abram if you find books by either one, or them having worked together. It's a good bet. It's going to be a good book. Here's another book I just recently picked up. It's called Epistemology: 50 Puzzles, Paradoxes, and Thought Experiments, by Kevin McCain. The first one actually has the Gettier problem. Yeah, the first one's on the Gettier problem, but they have other ones, and this is the kind of thing I think, like, when you get into philosophy that interests you, like philosophical puzzles, philosophical problems. I forget the other word. It's called like sorites. Anyway, these kinds of things, and so this lists some of the most famous ones, explains them, and then like you can just jump off from there. You can try to tackle them on your own. You don't have to buy into anybody else's theories. So okay, epistemology, more epistemology. This is the anthology. This is the Blackwell philosophy anthologies on epistemology. This is edited by Ernest Sosa and Jaguar Kim. Speaking of philosophers who write super clearly, I found no better than Jaguar Kim. If you're into philosophy of mind, he writes on philosophy of mind. Read his books, or especially like the introductory series to philosophy of mind that he puts out. I don't know if it's by Blackwell. I think it's by Routledge. Anyway, Jaguar Kim. Ernest Hus is a great philosopher too, but I especially like the way Jaguar Kim writes. So I have this book. Another book that I just recently picked up on epistemology. I recently picked up some epistemology and philosophy of language books, and maybe I think a couple like logic books. Explaining Knowledge. Okay, this one is by Rodrigo Borges. No, sorry, this is edited by. This is just a compilation of famous articles or articles in epistemology by Rodrigo Borges, Claudio de Almeida, and Peter D. Klein. New essays on the Gettier problem. Oh, this is specifically on the Gettier problem. As I was thinking about making videos on Gettier's famous Is Just What You Believe Knowledge, I thought I should I should get up to speed on what contemporary philosophers are saying on the Gettier problem. But I never did. I haven't read this, but I'm gonna read through it, and because I have my own objection to Gettier, because I think he goes wrong specifically in a certain way, like I am quite sure that I'm going to disagree with a lot of these philosophers as to what they think has gone wrong, or what they think we should learn from the Gettier problem, or the problems Gettier poses for JTB especially, right? Okay, so but so like I'm trying to do my due diligence here, get up to speed on the things that I'm talking about. Okay, next book is quite interesting. This book is called The Practical Stoic. This is by Farnsworth, and what Farnsworth does here is basically he takes quotes of various Stoic philosophers and he uses them to make to explain Stoicism to you. So instead of just reading like Marcus Aurelius on Stoicism, instead of reading like some other philosopher on Stoicism, he will pick and choose famous quotes, or maybe not so famous, but quotes that basically explain Stoicism to you. And then on top of that, he's providing the quotes to back up what he's saying, but the quotes also make it a much more interesting read. So interesting take. If you have some interest in Stoicism, I highly recommend this book. If you have like a deep interest in Stoicism, then obviously you're going to want to read, firsthand essays by like Marcus Aurelius. I can't think of another Stoic right now for some reason. Okay, next, another interest of mine is metaphysics. This book is called The Evolution of Modern Philosophy, The Evolution of Modern Metaphysics, Making Sense of Things by A.W. Moore. He's taking a historical look back in time at how philosophers made sense of things and their accounts to make sense of things. I know it's a little bit theoretical, but okay. And that's what he's doing. He's tracing back the development of how philosophers made sense of things, or made sense of the world, or made sense of the things. Made sense of things in the world. So this is a book. This is a metaphysics book. Okay. I haven't done metaphysics in a long time, but I like it. Okay, moving now, I guess, to let me jump ahead. Yeah, let's do this. So, ancient philosophy. If you're getting into analytic philosophy, and by the way, I highly recommend Gettier's paper as one of the things you read if you're just getting into analytic philosophy. It's 2.5 pages long. It's beautifully written. And you'll come across certain problems in epistemology, which are like contemporary problems, but they're also perennial problems. Okay, here's another book that I recommend you dive into. This is the 5 Dialogues by Plato, right? The Euthyphro, the Apology, Crito, Meno, and Phaedo. They're not long. They're in a like Platonic dialogue style. Highly recommended entry into analytic philosophy, or just philosophy in general. Next book here, I have Socrates by Gottlieb. Anthony Gottlieb. Very short, very succinct, very nice intro into Socrates. Okay, obviously it's not meant to be like exhaustive in any sense, but if you want to get some idea what who Socrates was, what Socrates believed, what philosophical what we know about his thoughts, this is a nice little introduction. Okay, next. All right, the next few books, well, not, actually I take that back. This book is on philosophy of language. Again, one of my favorite subfields within philosophy. This is by Scott Soames, Philosophy of Language. I believe this is book 1 of 2, or maybe not. Let me check the title. Let me check inside. It just says Philosophy of Language. It doesn't say like book 1 or book 2. Yeah. So anyway, so I have this book. Nice book. Then this book, I guess, would be like Philosophy of Language or maybe Logic. And this is, again, this has to do somewhat with the Gettier problem, but I think not really too much. But it's new thinking about propositions. Propositions are interesting subject in philosophy. Like, what are they exactly? So like, are they linguistic? And if they're linguistic, so are they the meanings of sentences? And what exactly are their properties? Right. So there's a lot of views on what properties are. And actually the book I have coming is on properties also. I don't remember it offhand, but anyway. More Philosophy of Language. Philosophy of Language, The Big Questions. This is edited by Andrea Nye. It's like an anthology. Like I have Martin Nitsch's book, Philosophy of Language. I don't have it with me. You won't see it here, but I have it in storage. Like Martin Nitsch edits a nice anthology on philosophy of language, by the way. But this is also a decent attempt. It's not as good, but it's not bad, right? Part 1, language, what is it? Part 2, meaning, how do words get their sense? Part 3, speaking, what is it to say something? Part 4, reference, what do we talk about? Part 5, truth, what is the relation between language and reality? And Part 6, other minds in foreign tongues, how is it possible to understand what someone else says, right? Okay, so you get some idea. Another book, which is not technically a philosophy book, I would say, but it talks about philosophical stuff. It's semantics, right? So semantics being one part of logic. So semantics has to do with meaning. How do words mean what they mean? How do sentences mean what they mean? Okay, how do we determine meaning? And this has this is just loaded with, oh, by the way, this is by edited by Farhang Zabi, E.D. Klemke, and Arthur Jacobson. And you'll find articles in here by Tarski, by Grice, by, I want to say by Russell, by Frege. Okay, maybe flipping through the table of contents right now is not very smart to try to do. I can't find it. Anyway, so I have this book. It's a nice collection of essays in, I would just say, philosophy of language. All right. So now moving on, I'm going to have to twist here. And these are my logic books. I'm going to put this aside here. And I'll bring down my logic books. Okay. And I have more. I have maybe 10 logic textbooks. Like the ones you would need for like a logic class, a formal logic class. Like I have a Hurley's book. I have what is the book that we used? I can't think of it. Why can't I think of it? Anyway, whatever. I'll just show you what I have. Okay, so this book is on medieval logic. This is by Philotheus Boner. Yeah, I said it, Boner. The outlines of its development from 1250 to 1400. Okay, so if you're interested in medieval logic a little bit, I have that. I have this book, which is a recent pickup by Peter Smith, formal logic and introduction. Nice writing, nice entry into formal logic. If you don't know formal logic, if you're getting into it, if you want to do self-study, it's not a bad option. It's a pretty good option. But as far as self-study goes, I have slightly better options, meaning I have more dumbed down versions. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean that in a very helpful way. These authors assume these authors assume that you know even less than Peter Smith assumes his reader knows. But this is a good book. Don't get me wrong. Philosophical Logic, a Contemporary Introduction. This is by John McFarlane. Yeah, this is not for your self-learner. This is not for your intro student into logic, but it's a good book. More intro stuff. Maybe this, I don't need this little light that's shining in my face here. Symbolic Logic. This is the 5th edition, revised. This is by Daniel Kern, PhD. It's always trouble when you see PhD on the bottom of philosophers' names, because it makes me, when on people's names that write philosophy books, it makes me think they're not philosophers. But I don't know that about Kern or not. Anyway, so yeah, introductory stuff into philosophy, truth tables, whatnot. Introductory Theory of Logic, Zalabardo. Yeah, Jose Zalabardo, another introductory text, good introductory text. I have a slightly better one I'll recommend to you in a second, but it's a good, if you like logic and you know a little bit about logic, this is not a bad way to go. Okay, now this is not introductory in any way. It's not super advanced, but anyway, so it's Logic for Philosophy, basically the logic that is being used to do contemporary philosophy, and it's a lot, right? It's a lot. In my opinion, philosophy, it's gotten out of hand how much logic is involved in philosophy today. I think one, it's not necessary, and although it's helpful, it's not necessary. And yeah, so I think we're overly relying on logic in contemporary philosophy, like in philosophy of language, obviously, not obviously, but in philosophy of language, for example. Okay, but this is a good book by Theodore Sider, and he explains the logic that you need to understand to generally understand the stuff that's being written today in philosophy. Okay, now here's one of the 2 books that I highly recommend. Maybe I do need this light, but maybe how can I shine it so it's not in my? No. Okay, let's leave it at. I hope this is good enough lighting. I'll put it up closer. Propositional Logic and Set Theory by Caesar R. and Gallo P. 2 members of the Beastie Boys. I don't know why they call themselves this on this book. That sounds weird. Anyway, this is a very, very good self-study book for symbolic logic. It's split in 2, obviously, into propositional logic and set theory. I have not read the set theory half. I've read the propositional logic half, and it's excellent for self-study. Here's another book for self-study, excellent introduction to symbolic logic, called Logic with Trees. If you don't know, one of the ways we can prove arguments is by using trees. And yeah, so anyway, they're logic trees. Introduction to Symbolic Logic. This is by Colin Howson. Excellent job. I highly recommend this book. Okay, and that is those were my logic books. Again, this is not even half of my logic books, or maybe close to half of my logic books, and the other half are the thick textbooks by Kalish and Montague, the one that is used at UCLA. Kalish and Montague has been used for a long time. I don't know if they still use it, but Kalish and Montague attended UCLA, or they were there when they wrote that book, I believe. Hurley, popular book, and there's other books that are used throughout, at least I know in California, for philosophy, for logic, like whether you're City College or some state school or a UC, or maybe like Stanford or USC. Okay, next we're going into. Do I want to talk about that? Yeah, I'll do it, even though I didn't mean to do this order. Okay, so kind of an oddball book here. I'm going to put this aside first. Oddball book. Oddball book here is The Philosopher's Toolkit. If you're getting into analytic philosophy and you haven't heard of the use mention distinction, you haven't heard of the de re de dicto distinction, you haven't heard of certain fallacies, then this book covers it, right? This book will cover things that you haven't heard of. Nobody has heard of all the things that mentioned in this book. I've been reading. I'm not super like steeped in philosophy, but I've been doing my share of philosophy for a long time. And there's a lot of things in here that I haven't heard of, and some of them I looked up, and I'm like, oh, good to know, right? So okay, and the explanations are good, the examples are good. I recommend this book. Let me put it aside here. Next books I have are going to be on philosophers that I don't understand. And the reason I don't understand them is because they rely heavily on symbolic logic when they explain their positions. Their papers require a certain sophistication of symbolic logic. Sophistication which I have not bothered to reach or attain. Because I don't think it's worth it. Honestly, I don't think it's worth it. And I think my time is better spent doing something else. And I'm not trying to belittle it because I'm not good at it. I'm not trying to belittle it because it's hard to attain. I just really think that you can do a lot of good philosophy. You can be a very good philosopher. You can be an excellent philosopher without really knowing any symbolic logic. Well, close to any. And I know some. I've taken symbolic logic courses. I've done well in my symbolic logic. I was a TA in a symbolic logic course. So it's not like I'm ignorant here. I have more symbolic logic than most people, and even I have a very solid understanding. I don't have a sophistication of it though. And to read a lot of the papers today, I get lost. And then again, I don't really care about some of those what's being argued or talked about in some of those papers, I think I have other philosophers to read that can explain things without relying on the heavy reliance on symbolic logic. Anyway, okay, that's just my thing. It's I have this anti-possible world semantics thing. I have this anti symbolic logic thing. Okay, so one of those is Rudolf Carnap. And Carnap is one of the logical positivists. And I think I do need this light, but I don't like this little circle that I see in my face. Okay, maybe I can just turn it like this. Okay, so yeah, so Carnap is a famous philosopher. And I think it's important to learn what he has to say. So I am slowly building up my symbolic logic so I can understand some of his papers. The semantic tradition, so more philosophy of language stuff, from Kant to Carnap to the Vienna Station, which is an allusion to the Vienna Circle, which is where the logical positives did their thing. That's not the only place, but that's the main, let's call it, hub of logical positivism. So more Carnap. Kant is another philosopher who I don't understand. Just his writing to me is atrocious. I'm not saying it's not rewarding. I'm not saying if you don't put in the effort, you won't be rewarded for your effort. Undoubtedly, you would be. I've read too many other philosophers who, I don't know, who not just who admire him, but they obviously say that Kant has something to teach us. It's just well known. You don't need you don't need a degree in philosophy to know that. But yeah. So, but I haven't bothered, and that's kind of my thing. I will not bother with, I will not bother with some philosopher if I have to struggle just understanding what he's saying. Not is he correct, right? Not is he correct, but I don't even know what you're saying, and it's a chore. And not necessarily because what you're saying is so difficult to talk about, but because you're just bad at writing, and it annoys me. And I will just pass. I will swipe left, right? And I don't care if it's Kant. I will swipe left. Why? Because Kant is not the what is it, the end all to be all when it comes to philosophy, and he doesn't have the authoritative word on even the subject he's talking about. But I think it's important to learn what Kant has said, because he represents a major shift in philosophical thinking, and I would love to know that, especially because I like to know history of analytic philosophy, or just history of philosophy in general. But I won't bother because it's too much effort, too much work, and it just annoys me that I have to put in this kind of effort and this kind of work when I don't need to with other philosophers. Yeah, so I love, for example, John McDowell. John McDowell to me is one of the best philosophers alive today. But I think his writing is also very it could just be better. And again, I understand that he's writing about difficult stuff, complicated stuff, subtle stuff, but I think he just could be a better writer. I don't like his style. Jaguar Kim, give me Jaguar Kim any day. He can talk about any topic, and I think oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. Or this is difficult to understand because the concept is difficult, because the idea is difficult, because what you're trying to conceptualize is not easy to conceptualize, but not because the person explaining it to you doesn't do a good job explaining it to you. Right. And I think that's what's going on with a lot of philosophers. And yeah, so I can spend my time in better ways, or I can just read other philosophers. Okay, so and that's what I do. Michael Dummett, The Origins of Analytic Philosophy. So I have an interest in the history of analytic philosophy. This is probably should be in my history of analytic philosophy, with my history of analytic philosophy books. I'm going to set it aside and I'll return to it. But Dummett, yeah, so I have Dummett. Here's another book on Carnap. This series is the Wadsworth Philosopher series. Honestly, this series got me, I would say, through a couple of classes when I was going to school, because sometimes if you take a class on Quine and you can't understand Quine, something like this will help you. If you take a class on Carnap and you can't understand Carnap, something like this is going to help you, really, really help you. And yeah, secondary sources, I'm usually against secondary sources. I'm a strong proponent of primary sources. Don't read books on Gettier. Don't read books on Is Justified True Belief Knowledge. Read Gettier, right? Don't read books on Plato. Read Plato. And Wittgenstein foremost, except for the Tractatus. When it comes to the Tractatus, I highly recommend you go to secondary source even first. Even before you pick up the Tractatus, I recommend you go to secondary sources to try to understand what you're about to read. But when it comes to philosophers who are their philosophy is just replete with symbolic logic, and you're gonna need you don't need a PhD in it, but you're gonna need some sophistication. Series like these, secondary sources like these, are very, very helpful, very, very good. And this series I found very, very good. I've read a couple of these books. Okay, speaking of Mr. Quine, whom I don't understand. Let me move this cursor. Sorry. Yeah. Quine is another one. I don't understand him. Too much logic for me, but important. Obviously important. You can't contest how important Quine has been in the 20th century. Mr. Quine, right? And this book is a secondary source. The Philosophy of W.V. Quine, an expository essay by Roger Gibson Jr. with a foreword by W.B. Quine himself. Okay, so I have this book. I've not tackled these books. I've read the introductions. I've looked through the table of contents to see if it's something that like would help me, like, and yeah, so okay. Now, speaking of Carnap, and oh, I didn't speak of any. I spoke of Wittgenstein, right? So now, if you go back and like trace the history of analytic philosophy, like a one prominent place to start that history would be with the logical positivists. And I have books on logical positivism. This is edited by Oswald Huntling. Huntling, go get your sister Gretel. We're going to have schnitzel. Yeah, I do the worst language impersonations. I know it's not funny, but I don't care. Like, I humor myself. This is the essential readings in logical positivism. Good book. I haven't read through it, but I read some. The man himself, Mr. A.J. Ayer, great philosopher, good writer. If you want to understand logical positivism, I think there's probably no better book than this book. And another book on it, Logical Positivism. This is also the Wadsworth series, but this is a rather thick one compared. The other ones are usually like half as thin or half as thick, like the one I showed you with Carnap. But this one is, well, this one's on positivism. It's not just on one philosopher. So okay, and so I'm sure. I have a bookmark here, page 11. So that's how far I got. Okay, yeah. So he talks about the turning point, the Vienna Circle, positivism, verificationism, the empiricist criterion, protocol sentences, logical syntax of language, epistemology, ethics, sociology as unified science, logical positivism vindicated, ? Wittgenstein and Vienna Circle. Wittgenstein is not a logical positivist, but they endorsed a lot of what he had to say, or they appropriated a lot of what he said for their ends. And then the turning point revisited. Okay, that's all on logical positivism. All right, next. I didn't. Yeah, okay, here we go. I'm gonna move. Sorry, I need to move this stuff, or else I have no room. Okay, so now speaking about, so I'm now the shift from logical positivism is a nice segue. So the history of analytic philosophy, my interest is I have it. And I think another great place to start, if you're going to read into the history of analytic philosophy, is British idealism. You can think of it crudely as analytic philosophy is a response to British idealism. And so to get a nice footing, to get a nice understanding of why analytic philosophers believe what they believe, it would be good to understand what they are essentially responding to. And this is a good book on British idealism. This is by W.J. Mander. I have other books on Kindle. I have a ton of books on Kindle. I have more books on storage that are on these topics. But anyway, I'm just going to present to you what I have here because I think it makes for a better video than me popping up like Amazon pages and saying, I have this book, I have this book, I have this book. Okay, moving now. I'm going to continue with this analytical history of analytical tradition theme. So I'm going to bring forth, I'll just, no, let me, sorry. I know this is not like the best. Ooh. Okay, I'm going to start with, I'll start with the man himself, and by the man himself, I mean Frege, right? If you're going to do the history of analytic philosophy, you got to do Frege, you got to do Russell, you got to do Wittgenstein. You can't leave those three out. If you leave those three out, like, I don't know what you're doing. What you're doing with your life. Essential reading. The Basic Laws of Arithmetic by Gottlob Frege. It's also accessible. Frege is not normally accessible. He wasn't the clearest, most like, I don't want to say conspicuous, but anyway, he wasn't like the clearest writer, but he's nowhere near close to being like confusing or convoluted or bad. And this is, I think, probably his most accessible work, like complete work. Recommend it. And one of his famous theories, Frege's theories on sense and reference, on Sinn und Bedeutung, its origins and scope. Wolfgang Karl, friends with Huffling. Karl, Wolfgang, go get your brother. I don't know what German name. Okay, good book. Explaining some Frege. I don't think you really need a secondary source for Frege, but it certainly does help. Frege explained. Please, somebody, explain it to me. From arithmetic, right, like the basic laws of arithmetic, to analytic philosophy, right, his logicist program, analytic philosophy. This is by Joan Wiener. No relation to Mr. Boner, if you remember the illusion mind. Frege, another kind of like a Wadsworth series. This series, it's more in depth, covers famous philosophers. A critical introduction by Harold W. Noonan. This is the Key Contemporary Thinker series. I like this series a lot. I have a book like this for John McDowell, who I mentioned earlier, who I like. I just don't like the way he writes necessarily, but I like what he has to say. So as much as I can understand him, I like him. I'm sure he's got a much more to teach than I can like glean. Okay. Mr. Tyler Burge of UCLA fame. Truth, Thought, Reason, Essays on Frege. These are not all Burge essays, I don't believe. Let me check. I kind of spoke a little hastily. Why can't I find the table of contents? It's right in the beginning, right? So where is it? These people are trying to embarrass me. No, they look to be all by they're all by Burge, right? They're all by Burge, and so yeah, Burge is a monster in philosophy. Pretty good writer. Like I wouldn't say like my favorite writer, but like I have no issues with Burge. Good book if you want to get some insight into Frege. Good book. Another famous author that wrote on Frege is Mr. Michael Dummett himself. You saw Dummett earlier. There's a lot here. I have not read this entirely. Philosophy of language. Okay. Yeah, I've heard some good things and bad things about this book, but I don't want to pass on just like hearsay to you. I'll give you what I think from what I've read. So, all right, continuing now. So we did Frege, we have to do Russell. Unfortunately, the only book here, I think I have one other book, but that I have here of Russell's is this book, right? The Development of Bertrand Russell's Philosophy. Who is this by? I do not know who this is by. This is a former library book. I do not care. Edited by H.D. Lewis. And yeah, so it's just a collection. No, it's just edited by H.D. Lewis. Yeah, and this has a lot. This book is like 500 pages, just about. Yeah, 500 pages, and it does a good job, and it does a good and the writing is good, right? So I recommend this book if you want to get an introduction into Russell. Okay, now one of my top 3 favorite philosophers of all time. Oh, I have another book on Russell. Sorry, I knew I had it here. This is on Russell's logical atomism. This is by David Pearce. David Pearce. Russell's logical atomism. Okay, important in the development of analytic philosophy. This is kind of what he's committed to philosophically that leads him to his positions later on. Okay, and speaking of now we go to Wittgenstein, and then Wittgenstein's logical atomism. Not exactly the same, but there's a lot of similarities, but like, okay, there's differences, and this book is by James Griffin. Recommended. I recommend both of these books, by the way. All right, now I mentioned before, like I highly recommend you do primary sources when it comes to philosophy. Tackle the problems on your own. A lot of the time, it'll just be an exercise in frustration. You're like, I can't make sense of this. I don't understand it. And then even when you do understand it, trust me, your understanding will be shallow. That happens to all of us. Uh, as you do more philosophy, as you get better at philosophy, or if you have some ability and you like, and even in your ability, like you'll even improve, you'll start to understand more, right? You'll start to understand more. You'll get more out of a paper. You'll be able to see an argument and unpack it, as we say. Like you'll see everything that like is actually there, but it's not written down, right? So anyway, and when it comes to Wittgenstein, when his two most famous works are the Tractatus Philosophicus Logicus. I don't know if that's right. Anyway, we just call it the Tractatus, and then Philosophical Investigations. When it comes to the Tractatus, I don't want to say that book is like incomprehensible, but it's damn near incomprehensible if you don't go into it with some secondary readings behind you. And so, or just try it and then like try it, see what you can understand, but you're gonna need to go to other sources to like start making any serious headway into what you've just read. This is by K.T. Fan or Fan. Wittgenstein's Conception of Philosophy. Good. I've read this. I don't endorse everything Fan says. I don't endorse everything any of these philosophers say of these books that I have on Wittgenstein, but they're mostly right. And so there's a lot to get out of these readings. Okay, and then some of these I haven't read completely. This is the Tractatus. Tractatus, an introduction by Alfred Nordman. So it's an introduction to the Tractatus, helpful. This is the actual Tractatus by Ogden. This is Ogden's version of the Tractatus. It's a popular version, recommended. Here is, again, the Tractatus. I think this is also Ogden, but it doesn't say anything. But if I remember correctly, yeah, translated by C.K. Ogden. Here's Anscombe, right? Anscombe, his most famous student, I would say, and she was like in charge of his material after he died, and she put out the translation of the Philosophical Investigations. This is Anscombe, Introduction to the Tractatus, right? It's an introduction to the Tractatus, themes in the philosophy of Wittgenstein. Anscombe's a good philosopher, recommend. More books. Another excellent book, Mounts, Wittgenstein's Tractatus, an introduction, right? Okay, recommended. Mounts is another good, has good insights. Here's our man again, Avram Stroll, Wittgenstein. This is, I don't think this is just the Tractatus. This is more. He talks about the Tractatus. He talks a little bit biography. He talks about philosophical investigations, and he talks about uncertainty. Yeah, so there's a Stroll on it. Here's an interesting book, which I wasn't sure like what I was going to think of it ultimately, but I like it. It's the Tractatus in context. It helps to understand. It helps to place philosophers or theories within the history of philosophy and within the history of the world. Like what's going on in the world around them at the time, what's going on in their lives around them at the time, and what's going on philosophically, in their minds. Like what are they thinking about? What problems have they seen recently or taken on? What philosophers have they read? Things like that. This book is something like that. So it gives you like this different perspective on Wittgenstein in writing the Tractatus. Highly recommended. This is by Claggy, James Claggy. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, not Clegg. Claggy. Wittgenstein by William Child. You're such a child, William. I bet you he's nowhere now. Okay. Yeah, this also talks about the Tractatus, the philosophical investigations, some of Wittgenstein's philosophy of mind stuff, psychology stuff, mysticism stuff, but I don't care too much about that. All right. Oh, another one. Oh no, that's it for Wittgenstein. That's it for my Wittgenstein stuff. Sorry, I'm gonna have to turn again, and I'm gonna put this aside. Oh no, that's not it. I misspoke. Um, another excellent book on the Tractatus. Elucidating the Tractatus is by Mary McGinn. Mary McGinn is a good philosopher. She wrote a book. What did she write? I think she wrote a book on how I became a philosopher. I read that book, and then which you wouldn't know because of my terrible memory. But and there's another book she wrote that I liked and that I read. I want to say I read some of it. Good philosopher McGinn. I'm saying, oh, I almost got it. Wittgenstein's place in the 20th century analytic philosophy by Hacker. Hacker's a good writer, a good author, good philosopher. This is another book. Obviously deals with two of my favorite topics: is analytic philosophy in general, history of analytic philosophy, and Wittgenstein. So, bonus, good stuff. If you want, if you're into Wittgenstein, recommended reading. And of course, I cannot leave out the Philosophical Investigations itself. This is the 50th anniversary edition. I don't remember what edition. No, this is not the 50th. The 50th is a different one with Wittgenstein's mug on the cover. I have it. It's the hardcover one in storage. Okay. Yeah. And then, so that's it. And then this kind of misplaced, kind of out of order. This is Bolzano. Like, if you want to trace back analytic philosophy, a good place to start is British idealism. A good place to start is the philosophy of Bolzano. Bolzano's Theoretical Philosophy, an introduction by Sandra Lapointe. I don't know which one it is. Oh, I know it's not Lapointe because that's just stupid. But it'd be good if it was Lapointe. I would marry her and take her name, Carlos Lapointe. Okay, Kant and German philosophy, decomposition. I don't know what that is. Meaning and analysis, the substitutional theory, analyticity, Ableitbarkeit, and Abfolge. I'm saying that like it's German, but I'm not even sure this is German, but I'm kind of thinking it is, because it is on. Well, I don't know. Bolzano is not German, right? Oh my gosh, terrible. Justification and proof, a priori knowledge, things, collections, and numbers. Frege, meaning and communication. Husserl, logical psychologism and the theory of knowledge. I have not read much of Husserl. Why am I saying his name like it's funny? Okay, and lastly, meaning the books that I have at my disposal, not all the books that are in this room, actually. There's books in boxes that I don't want to dig out because I'm not going to be reading them anytime soon. Like, I have books on philosophy of mind. I'm not into philosophy of mind that much. I have books on maybe some history, maybe some, not like history, but anyway, books that I won't get to. Okay, now, these books are part of the series. I don't remember how long the series is. This series, well, if you're talking about books this size, this is Copleston's famous series, The History of Philosophy. And the first two books start with the Greek and Roman philosophy. What's it called? Yeah, Greece and Rome. First, volume one, part one, Greece and Rome. Volume two, part. What the heck? I'm doing something wrong here. Medieval. Okay. Let's start again. I'm not editing this, by the way. I don't want to take time to edit. So again. Cut. Take two. Greece and Rome, volume one, part one. Greece and Rome, volume one, part two. Okay. Then we go to volume two, part one, medieval philosophy, Augustine to Bonaventure, and medieval philosophy, Albert the Great to Duns Scotus. And the series goes on. Good writing. I haven't read enough to endorse the series, but it's good enough for me to like buy more of these books if they ever come up on eBay at a reasonable price. It's getting harder and harder because people know about this series, and yeah, it's a good series to have, I think, especially if you're into like the history of philosophy. And this goes way back. It's not just analytic philosophy. This is all the way back. Okay. Now let's do another book on the history of philosophy. This book, History of Philosophy, this is a one-off by Julian Marias. Julian Marias, translated from the Spanish by Stanley Applebaum and Clarence C. Strobridge. I don't know how I happened upon this author, Marias, but I like it. It's good writing. It's clear writing, and I think he has curated his book nicely, right? For all you dummies, that means he's chosen good authors to include in his history of philosophy. And I say dummies lovingly, because I love me dummies. Anyway, maybe I shouldn't have gone off on that tangent. Recommended. Now, analytic philosophy, right? I like history of philosophy, but more so the history of analytic philosophy. Avram Stroll. I told you, when I see an author that I like, when I see a philosopher whose writing I like, I buy his books. Of course, it has to be topics that I'm interested in, but okay. Stroll, analytic philosophy, history. I'm going to stack this here. This monster, this behemoth, is by Mr. Scott Solms. Good writer, good author, good philosopher, by the way. I have his other book on philosophy of language. I have another book that is, I forget what its titled exactly is. It has to do with analytic philosophy, or maybe it's, and there's two books. I have the first one. I don't remember if I have the second one. This is the more recent one. This is the analytic tradition in philosophy. A similar title to the other one. Yeah, so I just got this recently, and good stuff. More 20th century philosophy, the analytic tradition, right? I'm pretty sure that's G.E. Moore, but I could be wrong. That's definitely Bertrand Russell. That's definitely Wittgenstein. I like G.E. Moore. I don't think he was one of the giants in analytic philosophy. He's one of he along with Russell and what's the other one? Who wrote the Principia with Russell? Whitemore? No. Oh my God, I'm forgetting everything. Anyway, Moore's most famous for his ethics, his topics on ethics. He wrote other stuff than ethics, but he's most famous for his ethics. I'm not really I don't really care about Moore's ethics. I like his other writings, but he's one of the I'd say grandfathers, I don't know, founding fathers of analytic tradition. But I don't read him too much, to be honest. But I like him. Okay, now another series of the history of philosophy, not just analytic philosophy, is Kenny. Anthony Kenny, a good philosopher, good contemporary philosopher. I don't know if he's still teaching. He couldn't be that old, but he's kind of old at this point. Ancient Philosophy. This is four volume series, so this is a complete series. Second book is Medieval Philosophy. Modern Philosophy. Yeah, the rise of modern philosophy. And when they say modern, like I used to think, oh, you mean like people now? No, that's contemporary. And then philosophy in the modern world. Okay, not exactly contemporary stuff, but modern world is more contemporary than modern philosophy, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm right, but anyway, I think that's right. Okay, and lastly, these four books all have to do with a topic that I thought I was going to write my paper for my applications for PhD program. So when I was planning to apply to PhD programs in philosophy, I was going to write on a topic called disjunctivism. So I picked up some books, New Issues in Epistemological Disjunctivism, which is the kind of disjunctivism I was interested in. There's other kinds of disjunctivism, like metaphysical disjunctivism. Oh, by the way, this is edited by Casey Doyle, Joe Milburn, and Duncan Pritchard. Duncan Pritchard is a big-time name, and voila, this is by Duncan Pritchard. Epistemological Disjunctivism, good philosopher, good writing. I think about it as clear as can be expected on this very confusing topic. Let's just say that. Disjunctivism. Soteru. Matthew Soteru. Soteriu. I hope his friends are not getting a chuckle out of my butchering his name. As if they watch this video. Anyway, so yeah, he talks about more than epistemological disjunctivism. He talks about metaphysical disjunctivism too, sense datum theories, representational content, naive realism, epistemological disjunctivism, disjunctive accounts of hallucination and illusion, which is like one of the major things, and varieties of disjunctivism. Yeah, so some of it here is metaphysical. Okay. Anyway, another book on disjunctivism. I think he also does a pretty good job explaining a very confusing topic. And finally, I have this book. You cannot see it exactly. There it is, Disjunctivism. This is by Alex Byrne, big time philosopher, and Logue. Is it Heather Logue? She also sounds familiar. Yeah, it's Heather Logue. I think Heather Logue's also pretty popular, or was pretty popular. I don't know about like how popular, but Alex Byrne I think was the bigger name. He also wrote. I read his one of his accounts. I believe it was him on fictional semantics, like how do we determine truth in fiction, which I disagreed with, but it was interesting. Like I've read a few. That's another topic I think I haven't talked about, and it's been a while since I even thought about it. Like the topic of fictional semantics. There are very many interesting theories. I remember taking a seminar class, and the recent PhD student who was teaching the class was a graduate. So he was a graduate of UCLA, and he was teaching a class at UCLA, a seminar for undergraduates. And he had written his thesis, his dissertation on fictional semantics. I remember also disagreeing with his account, but he was good about like listening to my objections and listening to my to my questions about his theory. And the class wasn't there to learn his theory, obviously, because he's just a lowly PhD. I say lowly as a even lowlier bachelor's, only having a bachelor's degree. But I mean, the class, nobody's taking the class to learn about this no-name recent graduate about his dissertation, right? It's not like you're reading like Wittgenstein's dissertation. Okay, we can do that. But anyway, so yeah, so I took a seminar on fictional semantics. Good class, I thought. Good reading selections, I thought. And yeah, and I think I learned something. Like I got a lot out of that class, and ultimately I came away with my own vision or my own views on like fictional semantics. I don't think it's like fully developed or anything, but there you have it. Okay, so that's my other book on disjunctivism. I think like I don't know. Yeah, that's all I'm going to show you today. I have like I said, I have other books stored away. I'm gonna move, I think, in a couple of months. I've already got books in boxes, and I have a storage facility with books from that I used to have in my living room before I moved to this place, which is like temporary lodgings, let's call it. Yeah, okay. So that's it. That's the book tour. I hope you enjoyed it. It wasn't meant as a review of books. I recommended some of the books that I've like actually gone through and read, or philosophers that I've actually read enough to endorse. And that's it. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. Later and out.